What is the most outrageous thing you've seen another guest do during a wedding? A wedding I was at was next to a goat farm and the goats bleated through the whole ceremony. Do you BAAAA take BAAAA? They weren't really guests, but it was ridiculous. Best man used his best man speech to propose to his girlfriend, and no, he did not run by the groom first. Not as outrageous as some, but I attended a wedding where the groom's stepmother wore a mini-skirted suit, paired with sky-high heels and a large brimmed hat with a small veil, all in pristine white. That was the same wedding where the officiant forgot he had a wedding that day and the groom had to track him down to a barbecue he was attending. So it started an hour and a half late. Steel bottles of champagne and flower arrangements. The couple had bought their own alcohol and was paying a corkage fee to the reception venue. One guest assumed it was free booze and was filling the boot of their car with bottles off all the tables. The bride's mother noticed her walking off with the centerpiece off a table and followed to see what the duck she was doing. Cheeky twat was quickly ejected. My friend couldn't afford to spend much on his wedding, and although the venue was large enough to invite a lot of people, it became clear pretty quickly that the set menu dinner would not be enough for everyone, probably due to poor planning or WE. I was sitting at a table with a bunch of our co-workers and our boss and we collectively decided to decline our plates. Which we did. The guy's aunt apparently saw that and started demanding our plates for herself and her kids, saying if we didn't want them then she should be allowed to have them. And she started a big argument about it with the groom's brother. Edit. Grammar and stuff. Edit 2. Since people asked, she and her children had in fact been served plates of their own and she wanted ours as a second helping. My buddy's wedding last year was a chow, through no fault of anyone in particular. The night of the rehearsal dinner, a groomsman was getting out of the shower and put his hand on the sink to steady himself. There was no bar or anything. The entire sink collapsed, shattering and slicing his hand open. I got to call 911, and he wound up with something like 15 stitches. Later that same night, a guest was drunk and tripped on the stairs, breaking her ankle. She spent the rest of the weekend in a wheelchair. During the reception, the groom's grandfather began to choke and had to be given the Heimlich maneuver. Otherwise a really fun wedding. Cousin of the bride stole the basket full of checks and cash. My cousin wore white, then tracked us down as we were trying to make our entrance as husband and wife demanded us to pose for a picture, then walked with us for the entrance. The father of the bride wants to share the story of the bride and groom meeting. He tells about how at the hospital his wife and daughter worked at. There was a disgruntled ex-employee. This employee brought in a gun and started shooting colleagues. He told how his wife was hiding in an office and locked the door so the gunman moved on. Later, a doctor who had been shot in the head and played possum managed to get to her door and she let him in. He gave details about the dead and wounded, injuries and outcomes, while he himself wasn't a witness. He told it with enthusiasm like it was the best thing to happen to him in his life. Then he offhand mentions that the groom was hired as temporary security in the weeks after and eventually he asked her out. Now they are getting married. The end. My 60-year-old, at the time, grandfather punched out the best man at my cousin's wedding. My grandmother had MS and was wheelchair bound. Best man started pissing right next to her. Almost caused a huge brawl. My cousin got married about 7 or 8 years ago. Groom's cousin was in the wedding party as a groomsman. So at the reception, the maid of honor and the best man both make their speeches. And then the groom's cousin gets up from his seat and takes the microphone. He starts giving a speech which nobody had asked him to give, and it's immediately apparent he's pretty drunk. He opens with a masturbation joke right out of the gate, rambles drunkenly for a few minutes, and then closes by kissing my cousin right on the corner of the mouth for about 4 seconds. And maybe 4 seconds doesn't seem like a long time to you, but take the time right now to count to 4. And imagine that the entire time you are kissing somebody else's new bride on the face in front of 200 of her friends and family who have all already decided that they don't like you. A bridesmaid wore a wedding dress. Edit for backstory. It was a gay wedding, so not the typical wedding party or attire. Basically each of the guy's best friends were going to give them away in a pretty casual ceremony. I wasn't even wearing a tie. I don't know the details. But cuntface wasn't aware that she wasn't considered the best friend. She basically threw a fit and insisted on walking one of the grooms down the aisle. She had another public meltdown later that night. She's not married to my cousin anymore. Maid of honor brought her 1-year-old baby to the bachelorette party and expected the bride to cut the party short as soon as it was time to put the baby to bed. The DJ stupidly opened up the microphone to anyone who wanted to make a speech. This was after an open bar. One guest made a speech about all the times the bride and groom were on the rocks from his cheating. An old family friend gave a tearful account of how she had wanted the bride to marry her son instead, and another family friend told stories of the groom as a child killing small animals. It was an amazing wedding. My teenage brother started breakdancing during the first dance. On the dance floor, people gathered around him and cheered. The couple, our cousin and his bride, were not amused. The worst was not a guest, but the bride, my husband's cousin. The vows were half an hour of her complaining about her husband to be awkward. She tried to sing the college alma mater with her dad instead of a dance and it was barred. The groom was stone drunk as it and was all duck that crazy itch. We started placing bets. I wasn't sure the marriage would make it out the door. Then she made us all watch a photo slide memorial of dead people and then, wait for it, the building of their house. Dirt, wood, walls, picking out carpet. I mean, it went on for an hour. All of us held hostage WTFing to each other. And she refused to pay her other cousin 4 hours of bartending. She was a social event coordinator, so it's like not paying the photographer. Yeah, we don't talk to her anymore. Ring bearer marched right up to the best man and started punching him in the crotch repeatedly during the ceremony. Groom's brother is a little person. He got caught snorting blow off a toilet tank by the bride's dad. Not sure if the little person part is relevant. I was just impressed he didn't have to bend over to snort off the toilet. Overdosed on heroin. The groom stepped out in front of the venue for air. Found his cousin on the ground in the parking lot turning blue. Brother of the bride got pissed about something. Punched out a window at the venue. Then the brother of the groom chased him all the way down the road to kick his ass. Good times. Not a guest, but the actual groom. Bride and groom have a fairly open relationship where each has a boy toy or girl toy. Most of their friends know about it, but I'm pretty that the grandparents and great aunts and uncles have no idea. So, a few hours into the wedding, everyone's got a few drinks in them and I look over the dance floor and there's the groom, dancing with his side chick, completely sucking face in full view of the entire extended family and guests. I'm pretty sure there would have been a murder if the bride's older brother saw what was going on. Mine were the owners of the venue. We had grabbed tables out of one of their cabin basements for the guests because they didn't supply enough. Cue them randomly starting to yell and scream and take the tables we just set up. The wife said we could. The husband was a control freak and didn't know. We had started a fire in their fire pit with the family, the owners present. After the old timers turned and a few of you stayed, owner comes yelling and screaming at us that we didn't pay for the firewood. What? The same logs were burning. 6 other things like that happened. A malnourished puppy was found on the property and they didn't want him in any of the cabins BC of the fleas. We gave him some water and went to get a flea collar for them. Owner comes by and says to leave the dog be, like a 6-week-old lab puppy, because it belonged to the neighbors. We asked all neighbors nearby. None claimed it. Ducking asshole. One of the bridesmaids ended up stealing the dog and giving it a good home. After the dude grabbed it and hauled it off in a golf cart to God knows where and the puppy found its way back. They told us we were the worst party they ever had. Right. If a family of Mormons was the worst party you've ever had, I'd like to meet whoever's weddings you previously did. Actually, me and my brother, we were in the desert at our cousin's wedding, and after hitting up the open bar for a few rounds we decided to walk into the open desert. The two of us ended up walking a few miles into the middle of nowhere and saying yep, we're lost. The sound from the wedding traveled pretty far, so we were able to hear it from the top of a hill and find our way back. We totally ducked up our clothes though. Also only our parents realized we were gone. 7/10 wedding. Would have open bar again. At the wedding, bridesmaid 1 found out that bridesmaid 2 had slept with her boyfriend, who was also at the wedding. We had to remove bridesmaid 1 from the venue as there was a high chance murder was going to be committed. The same wedding the father of the bride was so drunk he threw up in the middle of the dance floor. My brother at my wedding holding a cup of Jameson, full tumbler, and a Mike's Hard Lemonade, drinking both saying I gotta slow down. Then in my guest book he wrote Thug Life. This isn't outrageous, but still a pretty fun story. I was at a wedding my wife was standing in, and after a few hours of an open bar, one of the other bridesmaids, who is also my wife's best friend, starts getting really ducked up, completely out of character. She comes up to me and says, "Tonight I just need to get ducked," and strolls off. So, taking that as permission to help her get banged, I went outside to smoke a blunt to devise a plan. Two guys end up hanging with me for a little while, and I point to her through a window and say, "That girl will have sex with either one of you tonight." Long story short is that one of the guys did bang her that night. They are now married, and he is not only my best friend, but a father figure to my son. The ex-boyfriend forcibly cut in on the bride and groom's first dance together. After a few awkward and tense moments, some friends dragged him out as he yelled through tears, "I'll always love you and I'll be waiting for you when this marriage falls apart." Plot twist. Several months into the new marriage, she discovered that her new husband was a scam artist going by a different name, had fake IDs with different aliases, criminal record, been married many times, etc. He disappeared that same day, and yes, she now has been happily married for 15 plus years and has 3 children with her wedding crasher ex-boyfriend. My wife and I were given a double magnum of 2000 Maternal Rothschild as a gift. My cousin, who was already wasted, thought we wouldn't mind if she opened it up, and as she is carrying it down to the after party she drops it and it explodes all over my wife's wedding dress. Okay, so bride's dad goes up to speak, takes like 25 minutes. Groom's dad gets up to speak, about 45 1-hour long speech. Apparently he'd been pissed off about how the BD told him to get out of the way of the caterer, so decided he was going to outdo him. It was a horrible speech. He made oil and gas jokes, some weird misogynist jokes about women being allowed at the Pete Club, an old boys kinda club that chilled the duck out on that a little bit like in the 90s. Neither bride or groom were conch. One is graphic designer, the other works in college admissions. It was the single most conceited vile act I'd ever witnessed. Everyone thought he was a jackass. How do you take your son's day and make it about a grudge over a throwaway comment? What a loser. Work friend's wedding. We've all worked together for years and have become friends, so we were all invited to the wedding. The new girl was invited, even though she had only worked with us for around 3 months. We were all keen to get to know her better. New girl end up getting smashed, hitting on our boss, who is married. I'm talking trying to undress him on the dance floor. She was slamming shots that the guys were buying for her because she'd flash her boobs for each shot she was bought. Time to go home. She steals the bride's bouquet, throws up in the back of a workmate's car, and falls asleep in her front yard after they dropped her off. I can't believe she turned up for work on Monday, laughing about how much fun she had, but she can't remember any of it. At my cousin's wedding this year, the sister-in-law of the groom wore 3 different outfits. Each dress change got sexier and more like a wedding dress. It was all we could speak about all night. Edit. I should add for context, there were a lot of kids at the wedding, and when we saw her in her first outfit, we thought she was a Disney princess hired to entertain the kids before the reception. My friend went to a wedding where the bride and groom specifically asked people not to take photos during the ceremony. One of the guests brought a camera with a tripod and did it regardless. Apparently she had giant curly hair and there were a ton of candles around. Since her hair was so curly, she had used a ton of hairspray and her hair got caught in a candle and went up in flames. One of the other guests put it out but got burned in the process. Wedding reception in the penthouse boardroom of a bank. Lobby of said bank had a koi pond. Someone in the wedding party got wasted, took off his shoes and socks, and went fishing for koi with his bare hands. I wish I could say it was someone else. She was escorted out by the police before the ceremony even began. She was my soon-to-be mother-in-law. She is now my ex-mother-in-law. My aunt wore a white gown to my wedding. Super socially awkward redneck token cowboy friend of ours down here in TN. Love the guy to death. Walked up to the ceremony right as it was time for the bride to walk down the aisle, and began to walk down the aisle in her place. Inconvenient time for the mother of the bride to turn around and cause everybody in the venue to stand up. Order 2 jugs of bourbon and coke, and proceeded to drink them with one in each hand. It was the groom's father and he had split up with his wife recently. He ended up trying to fight me in the car park afterwards because I couldn't squeeze him into our already overloaded car. This dude in like a Mad Hatter outfit comes in. At first, he compliments the wedding, calls it beautiful, but then he calls the groom's bride a whore and his troupe of circus folk burst through the door and starts trashing the place. Saw someone shoot someone at the reception. Not me, but my parents witnessed a guest at a wedding die right in the middle of the reception. Guy just collapsed on the dance floor and was a goner. All of the guests were horrified and the kids present were screaming and crying and people began to leave. One of the parents of the couple got on the mic and asked the remaining guests to please stay for the sake of the bride and groom, but everyone's mood was killed and the room cleared out. When my mom told me that story I said, wow, that's a pretty bad omen. Are they still married? This wedding had happened when I was a little kid. She told me they weren't. They had gotten divorced 2 years after. My mom was a boozy at my first wedding. First, when I was changing into my dress, she came into the dressing room to scream, slap and punch for my dad standing up for me. She wanted to do it. She had asked me what I wanted her to wear. I told her anything blue. She wore black and yellow and looked like a giant bumblebee attacking me. I had my hair done that morning, so of course, she pulled sections of my hair out and ruined it. Once the ceremony began, she would repeatedly say, "This is bullet just loud enough for us to hear it." She refused to have pictures taken and upon arriving for the reception bypassed the reception line, went directly to the cake, sliced a huge chunk of cake off. She then scooped it up with her bare hand onto a plate, chucked some of it in her mouth and then spit it on me as she walked out. Of course, after spitting, she said really loudly that this was a red show and a huge ducking joke. "I hope you're happy now, you ducking cunt," she screamed just before the door slammed behind her. I was speechless. We carried on with the reception as best we could and I spent the rest of the day crying. Needless to say, she wasn't invited to anything again. Not most outrageous but memorable. Wedding of a friend. The first of our group to tie the knot. Tapped Out Simpsons game was popular at the time, and my husband was on it a lot. During the vows I hear "better him than me," which was one of the notification sounds. I about died and glared at my BF. He's choking trying not to laugh out loud, but it was from another single friend behind us, not his phone. Timing though. Poor girl also got rain on her big outdoor wedding plans. Had to shuffle everything inside to save it last minute. Then her aunt stole all their money cards at the end. I mean, who f***ing does that? Literally pulls his D out and does the helicopter and no one notices. Friends, grandmothers, wives, and no children wedding obviously. We left wedding favors along the table for our guests, and one family arrived early so just picked apart all the boxes to eat their favorite sweets. In hindsight, we definitely should have held the favors back to give at the end, but they looked pretty ire. There's a scene in Animal House where John Belushi screams, "Turtle," on a dance floor and lays on the floor like a turtle stuck on its back. I once saw an entire group of people at a wedding reception do this. One of my bridesmaids drank too much before we even got to the reception. We were all waiting outside the doors of the venue for the reception as they were going to introduce us as we walked in. Just as we are told to start walking in, I turn around and see this bridesmaid squatting and peeing by some random guest's car. Oh, and later that night, her and her boyfriend, who was a groomsman, got into a fight and pretty much the entire wedding party was outside for most of the reception trying to get them to stop fighting. I have almost no friends remaining today from my wedding party, but I'm okay with it. My new brother-in-law's dad stopped me when I was on my way to the restroom and said, "You look just like your sister, only prettier." Maybe not outrageous, but it was weird and I had never met or spoken to him before this lol. I've mostly only been to Asian weddings held at dim sum restaurants. At the end of the night, I'd see old Asian people try to cart away the centerpieces and anything else they can get their hands on XD. My best friend's wedding back in 1989 or so. Bride's much older sister, like in her 40s, Bride was 26 or so, started to strip on the dance floor. She did not have the body for it. She never had the body for it. She was escorted out by groomsmen, which I was one of, and instructed to not come back. My husband's cousin is a huge attention whore, and her mother's her enabler. His cousin spent most of our planning whining about how unfair it was that we were doing this all without celebrating her birthday. It was the Monday after our Saturday wedding, and then complained that we weren't inviting random gay guy friends she had, since it's a gay wedding, whatever that means. Day of wedding, cousin showed up in a white dress that was way more appropriate for the club than a wedding. Then aunt wrestled the mic from the DJ and forced the entire wedding to sing happy birthday to her daughter during dinner. Cousin faked surprise shyness during the whole thing. Also, I didn't find out until after, but aunt asked my mill if she could put candles in the cake and have the cousin blow them out for photos, as we didn't do the whole cake cutting thing. My mill threatened to kick her ass if she even tried it. My brother still tried to hand another relative's infant to him right before he and his wife walked up the aisle. She wanted him to carry an infant up the aisle with his soon-to-be wife. Tacky woman. Was at a friend's wedding. We all have a mutual friend that has been a serious alcoholic drug addict for a number of years. We have tried to get him help. He's not our responsibility. Anyways, he showed up to the venue 3 sheets to the wind. Everyone got a mason jar. Immediately he heads to the bar and gets his mason jar filled up. So yeah, he sees a few of us and comes over. He drops the mason jar. What does he do when the jar fell? He got down on his hands and knees and he starts palming the broken glass, slicing the daylights out of his hands. The venue had to clean and disinfect the area. In addition to that, they also forbid any glasses to be used after that and stopped serving alcohol on the actions of one man. To make matters better, when he sobered up a little bit, they sat him at a table and brought him a plate of food. Well, he stood up halfway through dinner and he pissed his pants. When we were leaving the wedding, we saw him passed out in the bed of a friend's truck. Surprisingly though, he somehow sourced piss and blood-free clothes. My parents' wedding. I was 10. Me and a friend went around drinking all the medicine cups of champagne on the tables. I'd never consumed alcohol in quantity. I got violently ill and had to be taken home. I was the best man.